going on, and I had 2 babies there, and I really thought he was going to, I don't know, he could have killed me. He could have killed me. I had no idea. I mean, I never felt like I had to call 911 in my life.
It was the wildest love story of the 90s. Pamela Anderson, the Baywatch goddess, and Tommy Lee, rock's untamed rebel. A Vegas wedding after 4 days. Tattoos, headlines, chaos. They were fire and gasoline. Beautiful, dangerous, unstoppable. But years later, Pamela finally calls it what it was, a nightmare. Behind the glitter and passion lay control, pain, and heartbreak she's now brave enough to face. What Pamela reveals will leave you shocked and questioning. The nightmare behind the fairy tale. From the outside, it looked like the kind of love that only happens in movies. Pamela Anderson, the blonde goddess of Baywatch, Tommy Lee, Motley Crue's wild drummer with tattooed arms and a grin that could melt steel. They had the energy of 2 people who didn't care what anyone thought. Reckless, raw, and crazy in love. But behind those flashing smiles and magazine covers, a storm was brewing, and no one, not even Pamela, could see how fast it would spin out of control. In her memoir, Love, Pamela, and her Netflix documentary, Pamela, A Love Story, she finally strips away the glitter. The perfect couple everyone envied was, in truth, breaking apart from the inside. She admits what so many had only guessed. It was a marriage filled with chaos, anger, and moments that scarred her forever. It was love, she says softly, but it was also a nightmare. The first cracks showed not in public, but in private moments, the kind that never make it to glossy magazine pages. Pamela describes the emotional swings, the jealousy, the constant tension that came with loving a man who lived for the rush of fame. Tommy's temper, amplified by alcohol and pressure, began to show. What started as passionate arguments became screaming matches, and later, silence that felt even louder. She was trying to hold together a family while the walls around her were shaking. Then came the invasion that changed everything. The stolen tape. What was once a private memory of 2 people in love became the most infamous scandal of the decade. Overnight, Pamela's body wasn't hers anymore. Her face, her intimacy, her trust, all stolen, mocked, and replayed by millions who thought it was entertainment. For Tommy, it was rage. For Pamela, it was trauma. That tape ruined lives, she later said. It ruined ours first. But the real breaking point came in 1998, when the chaos finally turned violent. She has spoken carefully about that night, when Tommy, angry and out of control, attacked her while she was holding their baby. He was arrested, convicted, and spent 6 months in jail. Pamela filed for divorce soon after, her heart shattered. She had loved him like no one else, but she couldn't stay. "I was scared," she admitted years later. "I was heartbroken. I didn't even know who I was anymore." The tabloids had a field day. The same press that once glorified their love now feasted on their pain. Headlines screamed, photos were splashed across front pages, and everyone had an opinion. But while the world judged, Pamela was quietly trying to survive, raising 2 young sons, hiding her bruises, both physical and emotional, and learning how to live again. She wasn't just a headline, she was a woman recovering from betrayal, humiliation, and loss. Fame had turned their love story into a circus. Even after Tommy served his sentence, the shadows lingered. Pamela has said that despite the hurt, she never stopped loving him completely. "He was the love of my life," she confessed. But it wasn't a healthy love. That single sentence carries the weight of everything. The way love can feel like both safety and danger, comfort and pain. To outsiders, she was still the glamorous pinup, always smiling in interviews, pretending everything was fine. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. Her private life wasn't private anymore. Every argument, every tear, every move she made was magnified by the lens of fame. The pressure to stay beautiful, to stay relevant, to stay strong. It was relentless. People thought I was this happy, silly blonde, she later said, but I was broken inside. Looking back, she doesn't tell the story with bitterness. She tells it with honesty. There's no desire to humiliate Tommy or rewrite history. She simply wants people to see her as human. She was young, in love, and unprepared for how fame can twist love into something toxic. Their relationship wasn't just two people clashing, it was two storms colliding. Still, buried in all the pain, there was something real. Even now, Pamela admits that what they had was powerful. Too powerful, maybe. It's the kind of connection that burns bright and fast, leaving behind smoke and ashes. She doesn't regret loving him. She regrets losing herself in the process. It was beautiful and tragic, she said once. Like most things that change your life, the nightmare wasn't just what happened between them, it was what came after. The endless gossip, the cruel jokes, the constant reminder of her pain packaged as pop culture. Pamela's nightmare marriage became everyone's entertainment. But through all of it, she found her voice again, not in anger, but in truth. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is look back at the fire that almost destroyed them and say, I survived it. And she did, but never easy because of a videotape that ruined her life, almost forever. Scandal. There are moments that define a life not because of what you choose, but because of what's taken from you. For Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, that moment was the theft of a private tape, a recording meant to stay between two people in love, never for the eyes of the world. But once it was stolen, nothing could ever be undone. It was the mid-90s, and the internet was still a mystery. A new, untamed frontier. Pamela and Tommy, madly in love, had filmed themselves during their honeymoon, laughing, kissing, living freely, unaware that it would one day become the most infamous tape in pop culture history. It wasn't meant to be scandalous. It was personal, just a memory between a husband and wife. But when a disgruntled worker who'd been fired from their home renovation crew broke in and stole a safe containing their private video, everything changed. He leaked it online, and within weeks, it spread like wildfire, faster than anyone could control or comprehend. The couple's most intimate moments were suddenly public property, replayed, mocked, sold, and pirated across the world. Pamela didn't even have a chance to breathe before she became the punchline of late-night jokes. She later said it felt like being assaulted over and over again. It wasn't about it was about violation. That tape wasn't for the world, she said in her documentary, Pamela, A Love Story. It was stolen from us, and it destroyed something inside me. For Tommy, the leak triggered rage. He felt humiliated, emasculated, furious that someone had taken something so personal. For Pamela, it went deeper. It was trauma. She became the target of public shame, a woman stripped not just of privacy, but of dignity. The media painted her as reckless, complicit, even stupid, while Tommy was often framed as the wild rock star who'd done something cool. The double standard was brutal. She was shamed. He was sensationalized. Their love, already volatile, started to crumble under the pressure. Pamela wanted to retreat, to hide, to protect her young sons. Tommy wanted revenge. They fought legal battles against distribution companies, but the internet had no off switch. Once the footage was out, it was everywhere, unstoppable, immortalized in digital chaos. The tabloids fed on it. The world couldn't look away. Suddenly, Pamela's body was no longer hers. Her identity, once built on the idea of play appeal, was turned into an open wound for the world to poke at. Every interview, every red carpet, every question came back to the tape. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a scandal. Years later, she confessed that she didn't even watch the tape. It's not ours anymore, she said. It was stolen. It feels cursed. For her, it wasn't just a loss of privacy. It was the beginning of her disconnection from the person she used to be. The incident didn't just change Pamela. It changed how the world viewed women in the public eye. She became one of the first victims of digital exploitation long before revenge porn had a name. But back then, no one saw her as a victim. They saw her as entertainment. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest cut of all. The scandal tore into their marriage like a blade. What had once been passion turned into constant tension. Trust evaporated. Every look, every whisper, every flash of a camera reminded them that the world had intruded into their most private space. For Pamela, it was suffocating. For Tommy, it was infuriating. They were supposed to be partners, but fame had turned them into characters, icons of lust and chaos, stripped of their humanity. Friend close to them said the couple never truly recovered. The laughter faded. The spark that once made them inseparable became a source of pain. Pamela started to retreat emotionally. Tommy became angrier, frustrated that he couldn't protect what was already gone. "We thought we could survive anything," she said later. "But you can't love someone properly when the world is watching you break." In later years, when Hulu's Pam and Tommy series dramatized their scandal without her consent, Pamela was hurt all over again. She refused to participate, saying, "They're still stealing from me." Her story, her pain had become a form of entertainment, replayed and rewritten by others. It wasn't just the tape anymore. It was the narrative. The world kept taking, and she kept having to heal from the same wound. Through it all, Pamela carried her pain quietly. She raised her sons, rebuilt her confidence, and learned that privacy isn't just a luxury. It's a form of survival. When she finally spoke about it decades later, her tone wasn't angry. It was weary, honest, and brave. "I don't live in shame anymore," she said. "I survived it." It's strange how a stolen video could destroy a marriage, but also reveal the strength of a woman who refused to be defined by it. The cameras never turned off, not for years, but eventually, Pamela stopped performing. She started living again, and that might be her greatest act of defiance. The whirlwind romance. It all began like a scene from a fever dream. Flashing lights, loud music, the smell of tequila in the air. It was New Year's Eve, 1994, and Pamela Anderson was at the height of her Baywatch fame. Across the room, Tommy Lee spotted her, the tattooed drummer of Motley Crue, wild, impulsive, larger than life. He was everything parents warned their daughters about, and Pamela was everything he thought he'd never have. Beautiful, radiant, untouchable. He didn't just notice her, he chased her. Literally. The story goes that he followed her to Mexico, showing up uninvited, grinning, fearless. Pamela later said he wasn't creepy, just completely unfiltered. Within 4 days, they were married on a beach in Cancun. No ring, no family, no plan, just two people in love, wrapped up in a heat that felt too big for the world to contain. It was spontaneous, reckless, and somehow utterly them. Pamela wore a white bikini instead of a dress. Tommy got her name tattooed on his ring finger. Friends thought it was a publicity stunt, but it wasn't. It was two souls colliding at full speed, chemistry that burned so brightly it was destined to burn out. When they returned to Los Angeles, the world went insane. The Baywatch bombshell and the wildest man in rock. It was a tabloid dream. Cameras followed them everywhere. They couldn't go out for dinner without flashbulbs exploding in their faces. But they didn't care. At least, not at first. They were obsessed with each other. They talked for hours, partied together, filmed everything, kissed in public like they were still on that beach in Cancun. Pamela once said that with Tommy, everything felt like a song, loud, messy, alive. He made her laugh like a teenager, and she made him believe he could be more than just a rock star cliché. In private, they were goofy, tender, romantic. They built a home, filled it with dogs, and dreamed of raising kids away from the noise. For a moment, they had it all. But when love burns that hot, it rarely lasts without consequence. Their personalities, both intense and unpredictable, started to clash. Tommy's temper, Pamela's fame, the pressure of constant attention. It was a dangerous mix. He loved her fiercely, but that love sometimes turned possessive. She adored him, but fame magnified every flaw, every argument, every rumor. Still, in those early days, their love story was intoxicating. They were Hollywood's most chaotic couple, but also one of the most genuine. They didn't hide behind PR smiles or choreographed interviews. They were raw, real, unfiltered. Too real for the image-obsessed 90s media machine. Pamela once described their relationship as a beautiful disaster. She wasn't wrong. There were romantic gestures straight out of a movie. Candlelit dinners, motorcycle rides along the coast, handwritten notes. But there were also fights that shook the walls, fueled by jealousy, stress, and the suffocating pressure of fame. Their careers couldn't have been more different. Pamela was the face of Baywatch, adored by millions, playing the world's most watched lifeguard, while trying to prove she was more than just a body in a red swimsuit. Tommy was a rock god, used to chaos, surrounded by temptation and noise. Together, they created something magnetic, part love story, part storm. When Pamela became pregnant, their whirlwind slowed for the first time. They welcomed 2 sons, Brandon and Dylan, and for a while they tried to build something normal. Tommy would play drums in the living room while Pamela read bedtime stories. They filmed family videos, went boating, laughed. For a brief, fragile period, it seemed like love might actually conquer all. But fame has a way of creeping in through the cracks. The paparazzi camped outside their home. Every argument was exaggerated in tabloids. Every smile was dissected as fake. The world had fallen in love with the image of Pamela and Tommy, the wild couple, the beautiful chaos. But few cared to see the human cost behind it. And then came the tape, the betrayal that would tear apart everything they had built. The safe in their home was stolen, their most intimate moments exposed to the world. Suddenly, the same media that had once celebrated their passion turned cruel. Pamela became a target, Tommy became angry, and the love that once felt indestructible started to fracture under humiliation and loss. Still, for all the heartbreak that followed, neither of them has ever completely denied the power of what they had. Even years later, in interviews, there's a softness when Pamela speaks of Tommy. She said, "He was the love of my life, and I don't think I'll ever have another like him." Tommy, too, has admitted, "She's the one that got away." It's rare to find a Hollywood romance that feels both mythic and painfully real, but theirs did. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a wildfire, beautiful, destructive, unforgettable. 2 people who loved each other in a way that couldn't fit neatly into a headline or a photograph. Maybe that's why people are still fascinated by them after all these years. Because behind all the scandals, tattoos, and flashing cameras, there were 2 people who really loved each other. Too much, too fast, too fiercely. Sometimes, that's the kind of love that leaves scars that never fade. But how did their story reach its end? Breaking point, arrest, divorce, and the aftermath. Every love story has a breaking point. For Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee, it didn't come in one explosive moment. It crept in slowly, hidden behind closed doors, muffled by the noise of fame and the chaos of their lives. By the late 90s, the magic that once glued them together had begun to crack. What started as playful passion turned into shouting matches, slammed doors, and tears that no one saw. Tommy's jealousy grew heavier, Pamela's exhaustion deeper. Between her demanding filming schedule for Baywatch, caring for 2 young children, and the unrelenting media glare, she was stretched to the edge. Tommy, meanwhile, was still chasing the high of his rock star life. He wanted Pamela's attention, her time, but the world wanted her, too. The same fame that had made them a power couple now began tearing them apart. Every tabloid headline became fuel for another argument. Every photograph of Pamela at an event without him made its way back to their home like a spark on gasoline. Pamela would later describe that period as walking on glass. She loved him, but she also feared him not always physically, but emotionally. She said it felt like she could never calm the storm around him. "He was my great love," she once said softly, "but he was also my heartbreak." Then came the night that changed everything. In February 1998, an argument in their Malibu home spiraled out of control. Pamela, holding their 7-week-old son, called the police. When officers arrived, Tommy was arrested for spousal abuse. It was the moment the world's most photographed couple finally shattered, not in front of cameras, but in the quiet of their own home. Pamela filed for divorce soon after. The headlines were brutal. Overnight, their love story turned into a public autopsy. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were kind. She became the heartbroken victim. He became the villain. What the world didn't see were the complicated layers between them, the history, the children, the pieces of love that still lingered even after the damage was done. In court, Tommy was sentenced to 6 months in jail. Pamela raised their sons alone while reporters camped outside her home. The same media that once worshipped her now seemed to enjoy her downfall. Yet even as she tried to move forward, she admitted to feeling conflicted. "I wanted him to be okay," she told an interviewer years later. "I didn't hate him. I just couldn't live that way anymore." When Tommy was released, he reached out. He missed her, missed their family, and for a time, they tried again. It wasn't easy. Too much had been said. Too much had been broken. Still, there was that unshakable connection between them, something neither could fully explain. "We were addicted to each other," Pamela once confessed. "It was like gravity. No matter how far apart we went, we always got pulled back." But the world wouldn't let them heal in private. Tape scandal, which had already scarred their marriage, refused to die. Their most intimate moments continued circulating online, becoming the world's first viral celebrity leak. Pamela had to watch as her pain was turned into entertainment, while Tommy's anger flared again and again over the violation of their privacy. In interviews, Tommy often defended her fiercely, reminding people that she was the victim, not the joke. It was one of the few times their old unity resurfaced, two people once again side by side against a cruel world. But love wasn't enough to erase what had been said, done, or exposed. Their attempts at reconciliation faded, replaced by co-parenting, distance, and memories. Yet neither truly moved on. Pamela remarried several times, but every time she was asked about her true love, she'd name him. Tommy built a new life too, but when he spoke about Pamela, his voice softened. "We were kids," he once said. "We made mistakes. But that love? That was real." In recent years, time has given their story a strange peace. The anger has cooled, the wounds less raw. Pamela has said she's forgiven him, and maybe herself too. She's learned to see her past not as something to regret, but as something that shaped her. "It was a roller coaster," she wrote in her memoir, "but I wouldn't erase it. Every part of it made me who I am." Tommy, in his own way, has echoed the same sentiment. "She'll always be the one," he told an interviewer, half smiling. You don't forget something like that. Their story isn't a clean one. It's messy, painful, human. It's about how love can be both salvation and destruction, how it can build you up and tear you down in the same breath. For Pamela and Tommy, love was never a fairy tale. It was a battlefield, one they both survived, but not without scars. And yet, after all the chaos, all the heartbreak, there's still something tragically beautiful about the way they speak of each other, maybe because deep down, even after everything, a small part of them never stopped loving what they once had, healing, regret, and the pain that lingers. When the noise finally faded, The cameras, the gossip, the courtroom drama. Pamela Anderson was left with silence. Not peace, but silence. The kind that hums after years of chaos, when you're suddenly alone with your memories. She poured herself into raising her sons, Brandon and Dylan, trying to give them the normal childhood she never had. But pieces of Tommy were everywhere, in their laughter, their faces, their music. She once said it was like loving someone through their shadows. No matter how much she tried to move forward, a part of her heart stayed in the past. Pamela remarried, searching for stability that never quite stuck. Kid Rock, Rick Salomon, Dan Hayhurst, different faces, different promises, but the same ache underneath. She'd smile in photos, but later admit none of them were Tommy. That kind of love doesn't happen twice. It wasn't nostalgia, it was a wound that healed unevenly. Tommy had his own reckoning. In rare moments of honesty, he admitted his temper and regrets, saying he messed up the best thing that ever happened to him. His life moved on. Tours, marriages, headlines. Yet, whenever her name came up, there was a flicker of softness. They were both haunted by the same ghost. That's the strange thing about trauma. It doesn't just bind people through pain. It fuses them in ways even time can't dissolve. They were each other's most destructive force and greatest love. And maybe that's why neither ever found real peace in someone else. Years later, Pamela spoke the words everyone already suspected. He's the only man I ever truly loved. But love, for her, had come at a cost. Her privacy, her trust, her sense of safety. The world watched her unravel, judged her, mocked her, and moved on. Yet she didn't stay broken. Now she lives quietly, tending to her garden, writing, and letting her past exist without bitterness. There's no anger left, only acceptance. She doesn't need to rewrite what happened. She's just no longer defined by it. After decades of surviving everyone else's version of her story, Pamela finally chose peace and, at last, herself. After all the pain and heartbreak came out a version of Pamela that's never been seen. The rewriting of Pamela Anderson. For most of her life, Pamela Anderson was a headline, a fantasy in slow motion, a symbol the world consumed but never really saw. Yet, when Love, Pamela was released, followed by her raw Netflix documentary, something shifted. For the first time, she wasn't being spoken about. She was speaking for herself. Gone were the glossy magazine spreads and red carpets. Instead, there was Pamela, makeup-free, sitting in her home on Vancouver Island, reading her handwritten journals. Her voice trembled at times, but it carried a power that silence had denied her for decades. "I wasn't trying to be famous," she said simply. "I was just trying to survive." In Love, Pamela, she didn't paint herself as a victim or a saint. She told the truth, messy, unfiltered, painfully human. She wrote about her childhood, the trauma that followed her, the men who loved and hurt her, and the machine that chewed her up for entertainment. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. And the world finally listened differently. The same people who once laughed at her became quiet. The media that mocked her began to admit their cruelty. She wasn't just the Baywatch bombshell anymore. She was a survivor, a truth teller, a woman who refused to disappear under the weight of her past. Her story became a mirror, reflecting how easily the world turns women into caricatures and then punishes them for being human. What stood out most wasn't her pain, but her peace. On Vancouver Island, Pamela lives far from the noise, tending to her garden, writing, walking her dogs. Her home isn't lined with trophies or memorabilia. Instead, it's filled with small, gentle reminders of life. Books, photographs, and sunlight through tall windows. She said she finally feels real, no longer a character someone else created. Her sons, Brandon and Dylan, became her fiercest defenders. They pushed her to tell her story, to reclaim the narrative that tabloids had twisted for years. Brandon, who produced her documentary, said, "She deserves to be seen for who she really is." In every interview, she lights up when talking about them, the one part of her life that never felt like a performance. As for Tommy Lee, time has softened the edges. They speak occasionally, mostly about their sons. There's no bitterness, no unresolved longing, just an understanding that love, even when it ends, can leave something sacred behind. "He's a big part of my life," she said, "but that chapter's closed." She doesn't say it with sadness, she says it with peace. Pamela no longer wears armor. She shows up at events barefaced, her hair undone, smiling without the weight of expectation. The world that once demanded perfection now seems in awe of her simplicity. She became a new kind of icon, not for beauty, but for authenticity. Her transformation isn't about reinvention in the Hollywood sense. It's about stripping away everything that wasn't truly hers. For the first time, Pamela Anderson belongs only to herself. In the final pages of her memoir, she writes, "Love doesn't always mean forever, but it can still be true." It's a line that feels like a closing curtain, not of loss, but of understanding. She's not chasing the past anymore, and she's not angry at it either. What remains is a woman who has walked through the fire, been burned, and emerged soft instead of bitter. Pamela Anderson was once the world's most watched woman. Now, she's finally the author of her own story, one built not on scandal, but on survival, self-acceptance, and the quiet, enduring kind of love that no one can steal or film. Subscribe for more untold truths behind the headlines.